good. So we're absolutely honoured and privileged to have Stefan Thomas speaking with us today, the author of Business Networking for Dummies. I'm really, really honoured to have you here, Stefan. And honestly, you're a very busy man, so thank you for carving out the time. If we're talking about business networking, so if anyone wants to feel bad about how little networking they do,
it's you.
Don't speak to this man. Don't speak to Stefan about his networking. So tell us where you've been this week. Tell us where you've been networking this week.
So this week has been, I guess this week has been busy, but it's been similar to a lot of weeks for me. I do a lot of work helping the full networking teams around the country. This week I live in Oxfordshire. I went to Essex. I then carried on up to Wetherby near Leeds in Yorkshire, then on to Harrogate a couple of days ago, then down to Tamworth in Staffordshire, and then up to Manchester, and now I'm back here in Oxfordshire. So I've seen a lot of motorways, and I've also seen a lot of people this week, which has been fab.
It sounds it. So I guess my first question was to tell us a little bit about yourself, and I guess why the great team behind the Dummy series of book came to you to write, to be the expert about business networking. I guess you've probably alluded to that a little bit in your introduction there.
I guess so. These days, I do an awful lot of networking, particularly with full networking, but it wasn't always like that. I walked into my very first networking event in late 2005, and I was terribly nervous, but I saw something in business networking that I thought would work for me. Carried on doing that, had a bit of a life change in the middle of 2007, and had to reinvent myself, for want of a better expression. Went out networking with brute force, really. I threw myself at it because I had to start building something for myself, and particularly had to get an income. Fast forward, where are we now? June 2014. So in June 2013, I ended up at a networking event in London, just outside Excel. Was sat next to someone called Sarah, and I asked Sarah what she did for a living, and Sarah was a commissioning editor for the Dummies series of books for a publishing company called Wiley. And Sarah asked me what I did, and then later on in the conversation, because we talked about wine a lot, and then we drank wine quite a lot as well. But then later on in the conversation, I said, "So have you ever done a Dummies book about business networking?" And Sarah said, "No, we've been looking for the right author for the last 3 years." And then life speeded up a little bit for me. 3 weeks later, I was meeting a senior commissioning editor from Dummies who flew into the UK to meet me. That was very surreal. And then about 6 weeks after that, I signed a contract. And now a year later, the book is published.
Fantastic. I'm a huge fan of serendipitous meetings and chance encounters.
And that's where I might go off on a tangent, because a few people have accused me of being in the right place at the right time. And actually, where we started this interview, and I told you what I've done this week, I've sort of made a career these days of finding an art in being everywhere. So whether I'm networking in real life or whether I'm joining it up with online networking, because let's not forget, you were at first an online contact.
Yep.
I remember I commented on your blog.
Yep.
We ended up chatting on Twitter. We ended up meeting in Edinburgh. And here a few months later, we're having an interview on Skype. And it is those serendipitous meetings that are just, if I hadn't made that contact with you, we'd not be talking here. If I hadn't gone to that business show in London, and plenty of people that same weekend would have chosen not to go, and plenty of people who were just as qualified as me to write the book would have chosen not to go.
Yep.
But I was there.
And not asked the question. So I 100% agree. I think that you engineer these you put yourself in a position that you may potentially have those conversations.
Yes.
And it's interesting because you can't set out and say, I will have that conversation with Sarah. It happens, but it's as much actually, I think, putting yourself out there, but also your personality and
Yes.
and having that. So I guess, so how important is the being everywhere, and how much of it is mindset and how you approach those chance events?
It is. Gosh, really good question. It's massively down to mindset because you have to be open to the possibilities. You have to be open to what might be round the corner. So I comment on Scott Torrance's blog, or I think I retweeted it or tweeted you a comment about it.
I think actually, even going one step further back, I think we both had the Gary Vaynerchuk event in London.
That's
in
right.
common, and then I posted a post on Medium about this kind of power of people coming together in one place, of like-minded people, and then dispersing, but that social media offers that kind of bridge that allows us to maybe stay in contact in a way that 10 years ago we wouldn't have even made the contact, and
Yes.
definitely wouldn't have stayed in touch.
No, and that's what's so beautiful about networking in 2014. And so to answer your question, it's about mindset. It's about, for me, it's about the why is what would have happened if I hadn't done that. If I think about all of these people that I've met, like you, and that's become an important relationship to me, but had I not taken those few extra steps, so it is worth, I can't remember the exact set of circumstances, but I was probably, I probably had the hashtag open for the Gary Vaynerchuk event, saw your blog go past, and that was a community that I was involved in. The hashtag for that event, for me, was a community that I was then networking in and opened up a conversation with you, which has led to here. So it's having the mindset that if I join in all of these communities, whether they're real life or online, then something might come of it. And then joining up those communities, and I can never remember whether I use my social media networking to join up my real life networking, or whether I use my real life networking to join up my online networking, or whether it doesn't matter and I just join the whole lot up along the way.
Which one do you think it is? Which one?
I don't know. I exist in both worlds because literally I've networked with around 100 people this week so far in various counties of England, and that's been fab. And now some of them we're keeping up the relationship with online. Mm-hmm. Some of them have posted photos of the events that we were at together. But then also, some of them, when I met them in real life, I already had a relationship with them online.
Yep.
So it's both and neither. I just join both up and understand that I can't see people as regularly as I'd really like to, but I can keep up simultaneous conversations with them as often as I want by joining up social media as well.
Yes. So we've chatted on the Head Resourcing blog about the importance and the difference between strong and weak ties in your networking.
Yes.
And the way I kind of simplistically view it is that a lot of the time social media helps with those scaling of the weak ties. So obviously you have your strong ties, you have the people that you meet in person, you spend time with, you know them deeply, they're your close, deep network. And there's a real value in it, but there's also a real value in this kind of really extended network of weak ties that you have, that social media allows you to kind of touch their lives in little bits and keep in contact with them in a way that, again, wasn't necessarily easy to do, and allows you to manage that both on and off weak and strong ties.
And those relationships are constantly in flux, of course. Someone who was a really important contact to me a few years ago, I now keep semi-regularly in touch with, but that relationship isn't as strong a relationship as it was. Her and I have both moved in different directions in our careers. I'm thinking of a person in particular. But other people who may have been very, I'm going to use the word loose rather than weak, because for me that just sounds a little bit better. Those very loose relationships that all of a sudden might turn into something terribly important. And it is by balancing your communication with people both virtually and in real life, you can react when those relationships do flux, or when someone suddenly drops something into a conversation that you think, oh, that guy was at the same event as me, let's go and read his blog, etc.
Yeah. So I guess we've started talking a lot about these kind of serendipitous meetings and the chance encounters, maybe that things go. In the book, you talk about using network as an excuse. I love that. That to me feels a little bit more about being strategic and focused. Can you talk a little bit about this, the idea behind that?
Yeah, of course. I can talk about what it means to me.
Yeah.
And I've been out training for networking teams on exactly this all of this week. It is that going to real life networking events does give you an excuse to contact anyone in business anywhere. So how networking worked for me as an excuse was that rather than put in a cold call to someone and try and sell them on the idea of doing business with me, or try and sell them on the idea of having a meeting with me, and that's, I don't know how much of that you've done, but cold calling people to get in front of them, I know very few people in the country who enjoy that. But actually just speaking to someone who you want to engage with and inviting them along to a networking meeting, using that networking as an excuse, inviting them into your circles in that way, that to me has been a massive eye-opener. Because actually just being a member of a networking organisation just gives me that excuse to engage with anyone and say, hi, would you like to come along to this networking event? And that's a much easier conversation to a lot of people, particularly a lot of self-employed people, than going out there and constantly trying to sell yourself. But it leads to the circumstance where you're actually in front of the person and talking anyway. So it leads to exactly the same set of circumstances as just picking up the phone and trying to sell yourself to someone, but actually using a networking opportunity as an excuse to talk to anyone puts you in front of the people in a much softer way.
And how long did it take you to work that out in your networking journey? Was that something you twigged from the start, or was it something that emerged?
No, I would like to think that I worked it out from the start, but I guess it took me a little while. I did decide very early on when I joined for networking, I did decide very early on to volunteer to run a group locally to me, because I could see how that just gave a different... It gave a bit more depth to who I was, because as well as being in business for myself, I was also the group leader of this networking group, and that just gave me a different depth. It gave me something else to talk to people about. But that was very early on. Whether I completely got it then, I can't remember, truthfully.
And so I'm a big fan of talking about networking, that there are many different approaches to it, and that you've got to find something that fits with you as a person and your personality. But it's quite important to have a kind of a strategy and approach. How would you say, I think it's fair to say your kind of, your business life has shifted from being a business owner to being an author and a speaker. And
yes,
how has that changed, or has it changed your approach to networking and the strategy you're taking?
I actually try not to strategize too much, right? because if you think too hard about who you need to talk to, I may not have chosen to sit next to a couple of ladies from a publishing company a year ago, because if I'd strategized that much, I didn't see myself writing a book. It wasn't what I was expecting. So I do quite like the serendipity that we've talked about before. I do personally, the approach that I found that works for me is that I do particularly enjoy networking events with some sort of structure, because as a rule, I'm not terribly good at just walking up to strangers and introducing myself. So my approach to networking is that I enjoy the networking events with a structure, because that for me leads to those random encounters with people, because typically, if you put me in a room full of people who I don't know, I'll find the one guy who I do know at the back of the room and go and talk to him instead of actively networking with people. So my approach has particularly been structured networking works for me. But my strategy has been to be open-minded about those people who I might meet, and just to see where it leads, because sometimes people strategize and think too hard about who they want to speak to, and then miss these huge opportunities which are going on just outside their blinker, because they want desperately to speak to this guy who's a financial advisor, but this guy over here who's a window cleaner
Yeah.
He happens to clean the windows of a massive financial services organisation. It's that sort of strategizing by not strategizing. I'll write that down at some point.
There we go. Strategizing by not strategizing.
Having a strategy of not strategizing, that's particularly what's worked for me. In terms of choosing an approach which suits you, that's really important in networking, but equally being open to the fact that the approach which suits you might not be the approach which suits the people you want to work with.
Yeah.
And that's been a real eye-opener to me, particularly in social media. Just because I happen to prefer Facebook to Google+, I have to and had to learn how to engage on Google Plus as well, because a whole load of the people who might come into my circles in the bigger sense, they prefer Google Plus to Facebook. So I've had to learn to get better at doing Google Plus, and I've had to learn to be better at open networking recently, because of course that there may be people there who want to do business in future.
That's really interesting, and I guess it comes down to understanding your audience, or call it whoever you want, the people that may be interested in now your book, and that
Yes.
broadens it up, doesn't it? It comes away from a local network to a slightly wider national, international market that's going, okay, I maybe need to reassess. It's very interesting what you say. I guess what when I talk about strategy, I very much focus on the inputs and not the outputs, if that makes sense. So when I talk about a strategy, I talk more about reminding myself and being purposeful about following up and how I connect with people. Not following up in the traditional, I've just met you, how do we follow up? But how do I, if I don't strategize the inputs, how I interact with someone and remind myself, then I very quickly slip back to what is comfortable for me. And I need to every now and then remind myself to say, oh, let's see what my loose, weak ties are doing out there in that sort of way. So, but I love how you put this kind of strategizing without strategizing.
But then you've brought up an even bigger subject, and actually, the real value in networking comes not from the event, comes not from that one interaction where you and I talked about your post on Medium, your blog post. But the real value in networking comes from following up, although not necessarily in the traditional sense. Because what most people think following up is after a networking event is to send an email that says, hi, it was lovely to meet you this morning, and now here's 800 words about why you should buy from me. And I think following up in 2014, no, it's not about it being 2014. It's about remembering the lessons that we learned from books like How to Win Friends and Influence People. What's interesting about social media is that you can scratch beneath the surface so much and get to know the other person. So, for example, Scott Torrance wrote a post on Medium, which I liked. I happen to have a network which exists in Edinburgh, and I spotted that you were in Edinburgh and were living in Edinburgh at the time. So when I followed up with you, it was perfectly easy to use that as a hook and say, I'm up in Edinburgh in 3 weeks' time, how about we have a coffee? It was more about listening to what the other guy's saying. And actually with social media, it's so easy now to get onto someone else's turf and talk and talk on their terms as well. And since I started using Twitter in mid-2008, the potential now to develop your network on social media and join up your network locally, regionally, or nationally, or even internationally, that's huge now as well. Google Plus, LinkedIn, and joining it up with your networking events locally, the ability to do that and then to follow up with people on their own terms using social media, it's massive. But most people still think about following up in a very salesy way.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, couldn't agree more. First point, it's so powerful. And I guess the follow-up question was going to be, do you think people in business are generally good at leveraging all those channels?
No, they're not. And it's such a new technology still. I started using Twitter in mid-2008. There are still, and we have to accept that there are still a lot of people in the UK just getting into it, and possibly because of this expression social media, people are still treating it like a post office notice board. And people are still following up on social media. So you meet someone in real life, and the way that I follow up is to fill their timeline with adverts about my business, rather than actually using social media just to continue those conversations. So most people aren't leveraging it at all. It's about assembling a crowd. It's about having that set of people around you, and then at those rare moments when you do have something to sell, for example, you've already got that crowd of people around you who may show interest and may see value in what you're doing. But you've built the crowd by engaging on other people's terms, not just by constantly broadcasting. And that's why most people aren't leveraging it. And the really sad thing about it is that people think that they are. And sometimes people are being coached to fill everyone else's timelines with adverts about what they do.
Yes, it fills me with despair. every time I open up my Twitter feed, just a small part of me inside kind of crumbles up and dies away as I shout at my Twitter stream. But for me, whether it's about a serendipitous meeting or actually, if there is that one person so there are times where you're saying, I would love to speak to that person. I'd love to just to be in that person's world. They're maybe slightly higher up in a pecking order in your mind from you, and you think, I'd love to sit down in front of that person and have a coffee with them even. Reid Hoffman in his book, The Startup of You, refers to the idea of having an interesting persons fund. Which I love the idea of that you put aside some of your money each month that says, this is money that will pay for the coffee or the lunch or even a flight that will take me to London to really meet up with this person. And that can be about reigniting old ties that you've had there, or it could just be that one person who's really interesting and say, do you know what, no, if I get the opportunity to have lunch with, then here is the money set aside to take Stefan out for lunch. Fantastic. And I'm thinking almost more from a more commercial, big business point of view, where they're doing a lot of business development, cold calling, and not thinking, this person is out there talking about their world.
Yes.
That is bigger than whatever it is, IT change or marketing. They're talking about wine, beer, rugby, football. And you have an opportunity in a non-sleazy way to be able to join in that conversation.
And going back, and I've mentioned How to Win Friends and Influence People already, written I think in 1947.
I think
and a lot of
I think was the.
Was it? I beg your pardon. Oh, sorry. I bow to your greater knowledge of these things. But so much of the advice, and so much of the advice that I was given in my early career, which was estate agency for almost 20 years. But so much of the advice that you were given was to take the conversation out of just selling someone's house. Yeah. And actually, in the olden days, you had the front of the Rolodex card where you wrote down the details of what someone was doing in business, and then the back of the Rolodex card where you would write down their children's name, what sports team they were into, that sort of thing. And all of that, and you laugh because all of that was sort of drummed into us. And I started my career in the late 1980s. But actually now, without having to ask someone, I could have a reasonably good idea of where in the country they live, what children they have, what sports teams they're into, what sports they're into. And most people still just broadcast about what's interesting to them, rather than actually engage on someone else's terms and develop in that relationship. And some of that old advice has been forgotten because along the way, maybe people have got confused by the technology. I don't know. One of the things which I remember in talking to you, which I used to do, don't do enough of it any longer, but this interesting people idea, when I first got involved on the For Networking online forum, this was pre-Twitter, pre-really social media in this country. So in 2007, I was chatting to other business people on an online forum, but I would make a point of picking up the phone to those people who I found really interesting and then taking the conversation offline as well. And some of those people I'm still very regularly daily in touch with now, by actually doing that interest in person thing and thinking, I like what this guy's saying online, let's join it up in real life. And you're still allowed to use the telephone in 2014. And most people don't take that one step further of joining it up. And as someone who's such a big advocate of real life business networking, it surprises people sometimes that I'm also such a big advocate of social media, because people seem to see them in competition with each other. You know, now that we've got social media, we don't need real life networking. I think the real savvy people are the ones who've learned to join all of that up.
Definitely. And I also believe there's huge opportunity. So what I say to a lot of my clients in the business I'm speaking to is you're doing something right because you're still in business. You know, you've got an interesting story to tell here. You're obviously building relationships. And if you can take some of these relationships online and mirror what you're doing offline online, you can scale this in a way that really is not possible offline. And as you say, it's not one is better or worse. It's not one is a priority and one isn't. It's them reinforcing each other. It's taking an offline relationship and taking it online, taking the online relationship and taking it offline. And to your point about the phone, sometimes it's actually that stands out. Because in a world where we get 250 emails a day and we can get notifications of retweets and favourites that are actually at the core quite meaningless, many of them, to actually pick up the phone with very little purpose other than, how you doing? Just catch up. How are things going? Anything I can help with? No? Fantastic. That can really stand out.
To connect with someone and just say, I really liked your blog, is huge, because to click on the favourite button or to click on the retweet button is so simple to do that it has become almost meaningless. I can't remember when favourites overtook retweets, but favourites weren't something that was happening in Twitter until, a year, 18 months ago, so much. And now that's become, and everyone does it, but actually picking up the phone and saying to someone, that was really good, that just takes the relationship to a whole different level. I think a lot, you're right, without winning it up, without going that little bit further, a lot of that online relationship has become pretty meaningless, because so many people, it's not a conversation. It's just maybe a series of clicks without actually getting into any sensible dialogue with someone.
Definitely. So I guess we've got to kind of keep an eye on the time here, but there's one topic that I've been chatting to people a lot recently about when it comes to, and it's the word networking, and actually what the difference, or is there a difference between networking, business networking, and relationship building? They're often used interchangeably.
I think there is a subtle difference, and I may or may not get the question right, but to me there's been a subtle difference, and that is that anyone's network is always in a state of flux. So building a relationship with a finite number of people and strengthening all of those relationships, that's really sensible. But networking and business networking then adds into it the people who I've met this week that weren't in my network before then. Yeah. Now, some of those will go on to become really strong ties in my network, some of them won't. But accepting that my network is constantly in a state of flux, that some people who were really important will have moved on to other positions in organizations. So the business transactions, the business relationship with me aren't as frequent as they used to be. But at the same time, through networking, I'm adding other people back into my networks as well. So that accepting that people are constantly going into looser ties within my network, other people are coming in who may form stronger ties as well. So networking helps to get the people in, and then you work on building the relationships with people. And everyone's busy. So it is up to you, if you want to develop those relationships, to put in the effort to do it, because everyone else is tied up in their own stuff, of course. Yeah. So once you have built people around you by developing the network, actually strengthening those relationships does take effort. That's where some people fall off, because it's not, people describe it as, you can do whatever you like on Twitter, it's free. But it does take that effort. It does take the expression that I always loved, going back to a very early Gary Vaynerchuk YouTube I saw, was that it takes sweat equity. You have to put it in yourself.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, final question. Who would you call out as the number one networker that's had the biggest, no, I don't want to say the best networker you know, who as a networker has had the biggest impact in your business life?
Oh, that's simple. I mean, there are two people for sure. I'll give you two names which will be very familiar to you. The first one is Brad Burton, managing director of 4Networking and founder of 4Networking, because he taught me through example about getting out of my comfort zone, because Brad does that thing of just making sure that he talks to people along the way, just making sure that he creates the conditions where the right people come into his life. Yeah. And some of that was hugely outside of my comfort zone. So yeah, Brad Burton, founder of 4Networking, has had the single biggest one-to-one impact on my career for sure. And the person who I've learned almost as much from, but yet have never had a one-to-one relationship with, would be Gary Vaynerchuk, because I've been reading and listening to his stuff for 5 or 6 years now, and just picked up so much about how to actually engage with people. That's been really, really valuable to me.
And two people who use Twitter very well, Gary Vaynerchuk with over 1 million people. Brad, I think, just tweeted is about to tweet his 200,000th tech tweet. I was like, wow.
And what I'm really proud of, incredibly proud of, is that I got into Twitter before Brad, and at first he didn't get it.
Wow.
And I'm incredibly proud of that. And I could say something trite about it's about quality, not quantity, because I don't tweet as much as him, but his ability to so effortlessly engage with people along the way is just huge. Yeah. Out of those 200,000 tweets, most of them will have been at replies to other people. Yeah. And that's what's incredible about it to me.
I'd say it'd be the same for the two people, isn't it? It's kind of...
Yeah.
That's absolutely fantastic. That's absolutely fantastic. So I know we need to keep an eye on time, so let's wrap up there. Honestly, thank you so much. You really, really need to check out Business Networking for Dummies, Stefan's book. Bring it up, Stefan. There we go. So what we're going to do is we actually have a signed copy of the book to give away. So yes, sign up to our newsletter and we'll send out an email on how to follow through on that. We're going to put all of Stefan's contact details down there. Please connect with this man online. Get connected with him on Twitter, on Instagram. You can watch him, follow him through some of the UK's loveliest hotels as he follows through on Instagram.
You will find me. No Red Braces is the handle I use across all social media. I have a particular love, probably a perverse love, for budget hotels in the UK. Yes, it belies. I like spending money on things, but budget hotels have become a big part of my life.
Honestly, you have to follow this man's journey throughout the UK as he networks from city to city. So honestly, Stefan, again, thank you very, very much. Look forward to engaging with you further on Twitter, on Google+. So have a great day, and we'll speak to you soon.
Speak soon. Take care.
Take care.